If you ever feel out of control around food, you're not alone, and you're in the right place to learn practical, no-nonsense information about why you binge and how to stop. Binge eating does not mean that something is wrong with you. It's a natural but primitive brain response that you can correct. If you're ready for change, sign up for the Brain Over Binge self-paced online course for less than $20 per month. And if you feel you need personalized support, we also offer one-on-one coaching and group coaching. To learn more, go to brainoverbinge.com/subscribe. And I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to the Brain Over Binge podcast, where you learn a simple, brain-based approach to ending binge eating. This is Katherine Thomson. Thank you so much for joining me today. I look forward to bringing you another great show. As promised, Katherine Thomson is back to discuss weight obsession, which is another issue that may be causing concerns for you in recovery. Katherine was also here in the previous episode to talk about food addiction. So if you have not listened to that episode yet, I encourage you to do that. And she was also here back in January of 2018 in episode 35. That episode was called Fostering a Positive Mindset in Recovery. And I know you'll benefit from going back and listening to that episode as well. And you can also learn more about Katherine's background in that episode, in episode 35, because we won't be going into that today. We're just going to jump right into talking about weight obsession. Katherine, thank you so much for being here today. I'm so glad to have you on the show.
Well, it's great to be here. It's always nice to talk and share some of my thoughts and experiences with your listeners.
I'm really looking forward to diving into the topic today, which is weight obsession, because I know this is something that can often hold people back in recovery. We're going to talk about why weight obsession affects recovery and what you can do to start to overcome it. I know the listeners are going to find your insights on weight obsession very helpful, Katherine, and I want to kick off this conversation by saying that although I know I said that weight obsession can hold people back in recovery, it certainly does not have to. I don't want you to feel like I'm saying that if you're obsessed with your weight, you can't stop binging. Because that's not the case. You don't have to feel good about your weight or have this amazing body image in order to stop the binge eating habit. Just like you don't have to solve all of your other problems or fix all of your emotional issues. However, it's my opinion that weight obsessions can be a little different than these other problems because having weight obsessions can often tempt people to diet and therefore not eat enough. And if you're not eating enough food, it basically makes it impossible to stop binging. So, Katherine, I'd love to get your thoughts on this about the ways that you see weight obsessions affecting recovery from binging.
Yes. So I've been asking myself lately quite a bit, and this is in response to working with a number of people overcoming bulimia primarily, some binge eating disorder, is what is it that speeds up recovery and what slows it down? So, if you look at what contributes to successful recovery in an eating disorder, the number one common thing that's pointed to is basically just like persistence, sticking with it, regardless of what method you're using. So the question then that I have is, why is it that one person gets better in a month and somebody else takes a year or longer sometimes? And the thing that has just been jumping out to me is weight obsession. Weight obsession, basically, it slows down the learning process. Weight obsession causes people to, as you were saying, first of all, often restrict during the times that they're not binging. And that does contribute to the cycle of the hunger and the deprivation and the binging. So that's part of it. It also prevents people from taking risks that could catapult them forward in their recovery. But if there's a fear that, oh no, doing this is going to cause me to gain weight, it retards that learning. I mean, I just think of like the image I get in my mind is like a toddler learning how to walk who doesn't ever get up, who's so scared of falling, they don't even get up. So I think that's another thing that happens is people just don't take those extra risks they need to do to really get to a level of freedom and confidence. And then there's even a third thing that I see come in. And that's this idea that I find it very important. And not everybody always gets this or connects with this, but I try and tell clients, every purge ends in a binge. Every crash diet ends in a binge. We think of it the other way around, that you have the binge first and that leads to the purge. No. Almost everybody I work with has a final binge at some point, a binge that is not compensated for, a binge that does not end in any kind of compensation. And so, but that takes guts for a lot of people, especially people who have a strong history of like anorexia or that kind of the restriction side of things. The fear of weight gain is so strong that to tell somebody, okay, what if you just had one binge that you never undid? And maybe it's 3 days worth of food, but just one for the rest of your life, just that one last binge. That is still so scary to some people, so threatening to even think of having one binge that's not compensated for. So I think those are just 3 different ways that weight obsession really does slow. It doesn't prevent it, but it slows down recovery.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And that's such an interesting way to reframe it, that every purge ends in a binge, because we are often trained to think about it the other way around. So that's really helpful insight. And for me personally, like in reference to my weight, when I stopped binging, my body slowly went back down to my normal natural weight. I mean, the binging was the thing that was causing me to carry a lot of extra weight. I was eating, thousands and thousands of calories at a time. So, I did naturally lose weight, but I find that this is not always the case for everyone. Everyone is so different, and there are so many factors that affect weight. And that means that stopping binging does not always mean that you'll lose weight. And a lot of it depends on your starting point and whether or not you're restricting and you're underweight. So, I find that when people have this expectation that they will lose weight when they stop binging and they don't, that it leads to a lot of frustration and possibly then leads them to doing unhealthy things to try to lose that weight, which, like you said, negatively affects recovery. So it seems like the people who are more accepting of whatever may happen to their weight during recovery do much better in recovery. Can you kind of talk about this and explain how someone can set proper expectations about what may happen to their weight during and after recovery?
Yeah, it's a tough one. It's a tough issue because a lot of people kind of go into recovery, it's like a leap of faith, especially people who have been, and this is not the majority of people, but there are some people who have been able to maintain a low weight through compensation behaviors. Most people, probably a lot of your listeners are aware of this, but even most purging bulimics are actually over their set point. I mean, I was, and I didn't even know it. I had no idea what was going to happen when I first started to work on recovery. I didn't know what my weight would do. And I didn't know I was over my set point. I had no idea. So it is a leap of faith. I think one really good thing to keep in mind is that for the first 6 months, generally, there's going to be fluctuation. I had one sort of guidance from somebody who said, just know that your weight's going to probably bounce. You don't know exactly how many highs, how many lows, but it's probably going to. And I will say, I do have people I've worked with that have not had weight fluctuations. They went in and they came out and nothing ever changed. So even that is, if they were set up with this expectation, things were going to bounce and it doesn't, well, that's interesting. Like you're saying, everybody is very different, but try and think about it in the grand scheme of things. Basically, you want to get better, right? In order to get better, you have to take this risk. If you don't do it now, you're just delaying the process to recovery. You can't know exactly what you're going to weigh at the end. But also, even after 6 months or a year goes by, there's still learning involved with food. And if you are still maybe medically overweight at that point, and you really do feel like this is not a healthy weight for me, you still have the opportunity to continue learning, how to eat slowly, how to eat mindfully. A lot of people with eating disorders actually come from backgrounds where they never learned that as kids. And I know, in my family, there was a lot of unhealthy eating behavior that was modeled for me. And it took me many years, even after I was no longer binging, to get to the point where I was really squared away totally with food and didn't have the desire to overeat or to restrict. And my weight continued to go down. I hadn't realized that I was really overeating until I got to a point of a lot of freedom with food. And I do think that mindful eating was a big part of that. So it's a slow process for many of us. And many of us do have long histories of being maybe emotional eaters. I mean, everyone's an emotional eater, but having semi-addictive relationships with food even before the binging, even before the dieting. So this could be a very long-standing pattern for many of your listeners, and it might just take a while to even out.
Yeah, and I think it's helpful for you to point out that the learning takes place even after the binging stops. And I think that's kind of the natural progression of things. It's really hard to work on those like you talked about eating mindfully, maybe reconnecting with hunger and fullness, learning what foods make you feel good. It's really hard to do that when you're in this cycle of binging. So if you can get the binging, habit under control, and then it's much easier to start working on these issues. So when we tell you to not be obsessed with your weight and to allow your body to find its natural healthy weight, it doesn't mean you should give up on health. It doesn't mean you should just resign to being an unhealthy weight for your body. It just means that, we don't want you to do unhealthy things to try to control it, because that just backfires and it makes everything worse. And I think a big part of recovery is just realizing the futility of dieting. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think when I was I did recovery in a variety of different ways early on, through support groups and through therapists, and then ultimately, kind of, as started to just sort of be my own guide and coach. And at the beginning, when I was kind of turning to other people and experts and more organized systems for recovery, I felt very defensive about this idea that weight obsession is wrong. I felt guilty about focusing on weight. And now that I'm on the other side of it, I wish I could reframe it for your listeners, because it's not so much that it's a problem to care about your weight. It really is not. It's the magnitude that people put on the weight. It is fine to want to be fit, to be a certain weight. I think that's okay. But it's blown out of proportion by about a scale of 20 times the magnitude that something like weight should really matter. It's an obsession, and it prevents recovery. And like you said, people do very destructive, harmful things because of this obsession.
Yeah. And I think when it becomes harmful is that it's not so much that you care about your weight or you want to be kind of your best version of yourself. It's when you try to be a version of yourself that's not possible, that's unrealistic, that's a weight that your body cannot physically be unless you do harmful things. So, if you're wanting to, like I said, kind of make the most of your own body and to feel good in it, it's not a problem. Yeah, as long as you're not obsessed. But when you try to sort of go outside of your natural range, which you might not quite know what that is yet, and that's okay. But when you try to go outside of that, that's when things become harmful.
Yeah. And a lot of people have an idea of what their best body is or their best self is, and they attach a weight number to this kind of concept that they have in their mind. But they don't necessarily realize that losing weight is not going to change your body shape. A lot of people, it's really something more about their shape that actually bothers them. And this is something I really try and kind of identify with my clients, is that usually it's not the weight itself that's bothering people. A weight that's just a number. But there's something about the person's shape they feel bad about. Could be more than one body part even. And losing weight is not going to change. It's not going to change you. You have a certain appearance, a certain body shape, and weight loss is held up to us as this like magical cure that somehow we're all going to become beautiful and glamorous and have model legs or whatever it is people are wanting if we just lose weight. But that doesn't happen. I remember reading that I think only 4% of women actually have the body type of a traditional model. Like even if they were at the very, very thinnest, 96% of women still would not look glamorous, so to speak, by our current cultural definitions. And so I think just kind of getting clear on that, having a little bit of acceptance about your body, about your shape.
Yeah, just having a more realistic outlook on it. It doesn't mean you have to love your body. You can just learn to view it a little more neutrally, a little less emotionally is really helpful. One thing also, I think, when we talk about overcoming weight obsessions, maybe the inclination is to focus on those weight obsessions and think about those weight obsessions and try to change them. But I kind of think it's helpful just to turn the focus onto other things, to try to get the person to look at the rest of their life and focus on things that are important to them that have nothing to do with their weight. And as it relates to recovery, like really look for benefits of recovery that have nothing to do with a number on the scale, because recovery is not about weight loss. So those are just kind of some of my ideas. But how do you recommend that your clients overcome weight obsessions?
Well, one thing I like to do is have them think about what are their positive associations with thinness. What qualities do they associate with thinness to disrupt that a little bit? So, and it's always interesting to me to kind of hear what people, of course, we think, oh, attractive or healthy or, maybe it's things like that. But no, going a little bit deeper, what qualities do people really think they're going to have or attain as a consequence of being thin? And then make an agreement with yourself to take at least one of those qualities that you've written down: social, successful. One person thought it was kind of funny. She said organized. Like, if I was thin, then I would be organized. And I was like, that's so funny, because in my mind, organization, was almost kind of in this other category of like not glamorous. So I don't know. Everyone has their own associations that they think that being thin is going to get them, and find ways of getting that quality in other ways. So if it's elegance, how else does elegance show up? How is somebody elegant aside from their body size? And really go after that, because that's what people want. People want the feelings of freedom. They want the self-esteem. They want to feel capable and confident. And those are the feelings to chase. The weight part of it is this roundabout, faulty connection that we've created. There's a more direct way to go after what you want.
That's so amazing. That's a great way to just turn things around, because a lot of times I find what happens is if people do lose weight, quote, successfully, they don't end up feeling those things. They end up being filled with fear that they'll gain the weight back, or they don't get those feelings that they're really after. So finding non-weight loss ways to get those feelings, that's what they're really after. So I really love that.
Yeah. And finding role models, finding good role models, trying to think of, okay, can I think of somebody who has this quality I seek that's not thin, and finding those examples anywhere you can. That can be really empowering. Think about the people you admire and why you admire them. It's not usually about their body size. It's about some quality they possess, something that they offer to the world, something that shines through them.
Yeah. And this just kind of came up for me about weight. It seems like from when you and I were dealing with our eating disorders, really thin was in at the time, and we're aiming for thinness. Now, kind of being really fit and strong and having definition and muscles, and that's in right now. But I feel like, just personally, my own body, I don't think I could ever be like that cultural ideal of strong and muscular and that type of thing. So how do you kind of see this fitting in? In some ways, I think it's a good thing that we're getting away from thin being in, but now there's some thin shaming, and you're supposed to have this other standard that you have to achieve. So there's still this weight obsession, even though it might not look the same as when we were dealing with these issues.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it kind of just makes me sad, because I think about, that bodies are something that we should feel awe about and a little bit of humility. When we start trying to shape and control our bodies, kind of like from this top down or this mental position, it's a little bit, I just see it as a little bit disrespectful. It's not bad to want to get into shape or to shape your body or whatever, but there is an objectification that kind of often goes along with that. I mean, I feel a little bit mixed on this, because I was definitely a gym person in my 20s. And as I'm getting older, I do feel like, oh, I should, lift weights again, because, I want strong bones and all of this. But I still associate weightlifting with this kind of like shaping my body from the outside in, instead of kind of just letting my body be at peace and just letting it sort of be the size and shape that it is.
Yeah, and maybe doing activities that you enjoy and doing the physical things that make you feel good without feeling like you're having to use your physical activities and your exercise to manipulate the way you look.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we live in a culture that just teaches us that there's always something to be improved. You're never good enough. There's always something to work on. There's always something you have to buy. There's always that we're taught that you're not okay right now. You have to be changing things.
So maybe a big part of this is just learning to be okay right now and just be in the moment and focus on the things that matter to you. I just think weight obsessions can become such a distraction and such an energy drain and a time drain. Culturally, men too, are not spending as much time doing the things that they're passionate about and pursuing the things that are going to be meaningful to them, because they're spending so much time and energy on these weight obsessions.
Yeah. Well, and it's a confidence wrecker. If you're constantly tinkering with your body size and shape, and people think they're doing that as a way of gaining confidence, but it's actually often kind of like you had said earlier, people develop the fear that they're going to lose it. Okay, well, now I've got this great body. What if it goes away? Well, that doesn't really breed confidence and freedom and honestly attractiveness. People who are free and are sort of appealing to be around are often people who are at peace in their skin, so to speak. And so I think that the more you're focusing on changing your body, the less of that quality you typically see in somebody.
Exactly, because confidence becomes very fragile if it rests on what you weigh or how your body looks. What do you think about using the scale or some other way to monitor your size or your weight during recovery?
So it's always something that I talk to when I first start working with people. And I'm pretty neutral about the scale in terms of, I don't feel like people have to get rid of it, and I don't feel like people have to weigh themselves. Um, Generally, I think that people should do what makes them feel safer. Is it easier for them to go forward in recovery if they don't weigh themselves or if they do? And usually I've found people know when I ask them, what do you think is your best way of dealing with the scale right now? It's very rare that somebody isn't sure. And most people I work with choose not to weigh themselves, but there are some that do. I think that you want to, again, keep this all in perspective and remember that the scale is a pretty barbaric tool. It makes me kind of laugh that we have these amazing medical technologies that can find genetic mutations, but our way of measuring health and appearance and body size is like a metal plate that's on the floor that gives you a number. That's it's almost like a conspiracy. I'm waiting for someone to write a documentary on the bathroom scale because it's incredible that this is still the thing that we use. So, but if it makes people feel safer and it makes them feel better about, for instance, the first time I got to the 6-month mark without binging, it took me 4 times of getting to the 6-month mark before I was finally over. But the first time I did use the scale, the second time I did not, third time I didn't. Over time, I got further and further away from it. But in the beginning, it was actually helpful for me because it was sort of like this reality check that I had not suddenly gained 40 pounds overnight. So for me in that case, it was actually kind of a helpful reality check. But I do think that the less you rely on the scale, the less you believe it, usually the better. And that most people I work with choose not to weigh themselves.
Yeah, it's empowering just to know that each person has a choice, and it's about what supports your own recovery, what supports the way you want to feel, and what's going to benefit you. So I really think that's a helpful perspective.
One thing I would say, adding on to that, is one thing I do feel strongly about is people not weighing themselves after purging. I think that is a really, really bad habit because it reinforces the binge purge cycle. Often when people purge, they're dehydrated. They're in a dehydrated state. They get on the scale. They see a very low number. And this is a setup for disaster because then when they start to recover, well, guess the first thing to come back is the water. So all of a sudden they think, oh, compared to yesterday, I've just gained 5 pounds. Well, the water's back, So I definitely feel like if you are going to weigh yourself, don't do it after a binge or after a purge. Try and do it sometime, when you've had a few days of just kind of normal eating. Otherwise, it just reinforces the cycle.
Yeah, definitely. And being honest with yourself too. I mean, I think us saying that you're free to use it in a way that works for you. Well, the way that works for you is not going to be getting on it every 5 minutes or weighing yourself after a binge or weighing yourself after a purge. If you're honest with yourself, you'll know when it tips into obsession or when you're using it as a helpful tool.
Right, right.
Well, this has been a very helpful conversation, Katherine, and I really appreciate you being here to discuss this topic. Before I close out the show, do you have any final thoughts about weight obsession that you want to share?
Well, I guess one thing, again, I just want to reiterate is that weight is such a small part of who you are. It's such a little thing. The distortion is, in retrospect, I can see how distorted people with eating disorders often are about weight. And when I was going through it myself, I did not see that. I knew that I had, whatever they call it, the pursuit of thinness or whatever they called it, but I didn't quite see just how magnified it was. So I do want to reiterate that it's a small thing. And also there's a quote I really like by the psychologist Carl Rogers. He was the founder of humanistic psychology. And he said, the curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I change. And I think that it's the truth. It seems to be the way things work. I see it with my clients. Actually, I just heard from someone I worked with. We stopped working together about 3 or 4 months ago. And I was just checking in on her, and she said, it's amazing. It seems so contradictory, but I am so, so at peace in my skin, in my body. I feel so free, so confident. And yet I'm still 20 pounds overweight. She says, and I never thought that I could feel both of those things at the same time. She says, I would like to lose weight, but I'm still doing the things I want to do. I'm doing things I never used to do. I'm going skiing. I'm buying clothes I love. And I think that when you can sort of embrace that, the both accepting yourself and also being okay with the fact that there are still certain things that you might want to change, or maybe, you're hoping that 5 years from now you'll be in a different space, a different relationship with your body, but you can have both at the same time.
That's so powerful. I really appreciate your thoughts on that. Can you tell the listeners where they can learn more about you? I know you mentioned one of your clients. Maybe tell them how they could work with you possibly in the future.
Sure. So the website is called endbulimia.com, endbulimia.com. And it's a pretty minimal website, but it does have my contact information. And I often have a bit of a waiting list because I work full time and just take some mentees on the side. But I always respond to people who reach out to me, and I am looking forward to hopefully hearing from some of your listeners.
Yeah, that's awesome. I really hope that some of you contact Katherine. As you can see here, she has some amazing ideas and insights, and she's a great guide in helping people overcome eating disorders. I really appreciate you listening today. No matter what issues you feel are holding you back right now, there is definitely hope. And I want to encourage you and remind you that you have the power to change your brain and live a binge-free life. The Brain Over Binge podcast is produced and recorded by Brain Over Binge Recovery Coaching, LLC. All work is copyrighted by Brain Over Binge Recovery Coaching, LLC, and all rights are reserved. As a disclaimer, the hosts of the Brain Over Binge podcast are not professional counselors or licensed healthcare providers, and this podcast is not a substitute for medical advice or any form of professional therapy. Eating disorders can have serious health consequences, and you are strongly advised to seek medical attention for matters relating to your health. Please get help when you need it, and good luck on your journey. Need more help? You can find all of our current and upcoming options for support at brainoverbinge.com.